forwarding. That's what I know, so.
You can just scroll through these.
Okay, so as you just scroll down, we basically just put on, you have the color version. Okay. I don't know how to zoom in. That's all right. So if you can, yeah. I'll just follow whatever, so that's what they'll do. I just didn't know what order you wanted to go in, so we can do the agreement of sale first. Okay. I just put whatever was on there, so I don't know if I had some of these other things in there, so if you just want. Are these just a cooperating broker? So there were, you should have 4 forms, guys. That in the CBC, the listing contract. Oh, yeah, that is. Appraisal. Okay. And then the appraisal sale.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. All right, ready? I'm gonna introduce you. Okay. All right, Gary, thank you for showing up today. For those that may remember when we went through all that debacle of NAR last year, I know some of you are newer. Gary was kind enough to come and teach the class on what new changes were happening. Well, here we are a year later, we survived it. And Gary's back to talk about some different changes that have happened with the PAR agreement just as of last week. Yeah. And Gary, we 30+ years broker experience, so comes with a lot of knowledge. Served on the PAR board? I'm on the committee. On the committee, so he's right in there. So figured we'll go over, get you guys educated on the new stuff. If you have any general questions, I know there's always like there's inspection contingencies and all that. He's the guy to ask, and the floor. Great, thanks for having me. One of the things Will wanted me to do in addition to all these forms, and I told him I would start off with that briefly. There were some questions about advertising, and so I'll just make it very brief and general. The thing you want to remember when you're advertising is what the Real Estate Commission wants us to do is the Real Estate Commission says the consuming public needs to be able to get to your broker. Period. Can I give backstory on that real quick? Sure. They might be like, why are we talking about this? So with all the new with all the advertising that's taking place through AI, VAs, people are using a lot of VAs. What we're finding is a lot of social media posts is non-compliant. And what that does is that puts you right in, I mean, for the new agents, you probably read a lot about the advertising guidelines. There's like immediate fines with it, people coming you in. So we're trying to prevent, as we go into this more technology-based era, that as you are getting those created, you need to look at it again too and make sure all the broker information is in there. So go ahead. That's what that is. Yeah. Work for. And your name and who you work for can be the same size. You can never be more prominent than your broker. So that's the thing. Size matters, right? You have to be equal or less than your broker. Your phone number has to be equal to or less than your broker's phone number in point size. And they are doing fines very aggressively. So I gave Will the name of an agent who I know was fined and met with the commission and developed a strategy around this. So if you guys wanted a deeper dive, I gave Will her name and she could maybe do her little spiel on it. But just remember, the consuming public needs to get to the broker. And you know how we all are on, I'm not on Facebook, but because I'm too old. Like Facebook wasn't around when I was starting in real estate, and after 30 years you just get referral business. So thank God I don't have to advertise. But I see posts, like I just saw a post yesterday and I thought this agent is in total violation, but it was created, and it could have been even created in Command, how Command creates stuff. You know how Command will do ads for you. Look at what Command's doing, because Command's national and we have state rules we have to follow. So just be careful, but just remember they need to get a hold of your broker, and you can't be more prominent in size, point size than your brokers. So any questions about that? Just look over your Facebook ads, and it is on social media that they're really cracking down. Yeah, that's where we probably see the most violations. Yeah. So you have any questions, call me, Will. Yeah. So I did give Will some information about that too. Thank you. So on the agreement of sale, we'll start off with that. If you go to paragraph 8 on the agreement of sale, you'll see under buyer financing. And I'll give you a little background on this. Before we either have you waive financing or you elect financing.
And we knew when it was waived that that didn't mean the buyer still couldn't go out and get a mortgage. They were still allowed to get a mortgage. It clearly said that. But the problem was agents weren't communicating with one another. It was being waived, and the buyers knew that the buyer's agent wanted to make their offer strong, so they waived financing, even though they knew the buyers were going to get financing. So what's the risk to the seller? There is no risk, but the problem became there's no communication between agents. We don't talk. We have to talk. So what's your first name?
Belinda.
Belinda. I would say to Belinda, I'm giving you this contract. Financing is waived. However, my buyers are going to get a mortgage. Here's their pre-approval letter. So an appraiser is going to come through the house. But if it doesn't appraise, it doesn't matter. If we walk away, we lose our deposit. So that I would tell you what I wanted you to pair it to your seller, basically. But agents were confused. They weren't talking. They said it was waived. So they told their seller, it's waived, no financing. It doesn't have to appraise. Well, that's not what the contract says. So appraisers were calling the listing agent, and the listing agent was frustrated saying, you know, what the hell is this appraiser coming out for? You said financing was waived. Well, it doesn't mean they can't get financing. So to kind of make it more clear, we were asked to put a third option in here. Everybody wanted cash. Well, what is cash? So we weren't going to make a cash option because, you know, that just wasn't an option. So now financing is not applicable, which means they will not be getting a mortgage, period, the end. Financing is not applicable to this agreement of sale. Waived and elected are exactly the way they were. So the reason they're in blue, anything in blue is exactly the way it always was. It was just moved in its location on the form. Okay, so that's why we use red and blue. Red is brand new. That's to highlight what changed. So now you actually have an option that financing is off the table completely this offer. So if you want to make your offer strong and you want to show the seller that no financing is ever going to be obtained. Now, if the buyer comes to the settlement with financing, they technically are in violation and default of this agreement. But at the settlement table, if they come with financing, do you think your seller is really going to call them in default, or is he going to settle and take his money and go? But they technically are in default if they get financed. So that's the major change there. And then you see subparagraph C-G are applicable only if option 2 and 3 are elected. So all that other language that was in the old financing is still there, but it's only applicable if waived or elected is selected. And the last thing we did with the contract, the agreement of sale, is if you look on page 4, under the block where we fill out the mortgage terms, we moved the mortgage commitment date. We moved the mortgage commitment date to be in a more logical place because everybody was forgetting to put it in their agreement of sale. So that was just a comment we received at the feedback. So just a little bit of history how the Standard Forms Committee works. Every quarter, there's 3 business meetings of PAR a year. And the nice thing for all of us in Central Pennsylvania, they're at the Hilton. So on one of the days, they have a Standard Forms forum where all of you can come, go up to the microphone and say, I have trouble with this form. Could you make this change? We record all those suggestions. And then we start looking at them and say, okay, which ones did we hear the most about and which ones do we want to take a look at? Then we form a subcommittee to look at it. Then we bring it to a panel that represents everybody from realtors from all the regions. And then we bring it to the Standard Forms Committee to approve or not approve. I was on the task force last year to look at all those NAR changes. They brought those same people back together this year to make these changes. So it's always a task force that does this. Go ahead.
When does this start?
September 1st, these will be live with the vendors. That's our release date, September 1st. So the mortgage commitment date moved, so hopefully you won't forget to do that. Yeah. That was the only changes we made to the agreement of sale. Pretty straightforward. Financing is off the table. we moved the mortgage commitment date. Any question, or mortgage commitment date, where you write it in, we moved that. Any questions on that one?
The one here where you said, it's waived. I always elect, financing. So with it waived, they can still walk?
No, they can still, the waive just means it's not, the agreement's not contingent upon financing. Just like option one where it's not applicable. But waived gives the buyer the right to go get a mortgage if they so choose. But if as part of that mortgage they got, if the house doesn't appraise, they can't walk. Unless they also attached an appraisal contingency addendum to the agreement of sale, then the buyer could. And then why didn't you just elect it? But people try to be creative and make their offer strong for their buyer, and they don't think through all the pieces. So to your point, why wouldn't you just, if you knew you're gonna get financing and it has to appraise, then just elect. Now, remember, if a buyer, by show of hands in here, I know we have the Zoom call. I'm gonna give you a scenario. If a buyer puts that they elected financing and the house doesn't appraise, can the buyer use paragraph 8 to terminate the agreement of sale? Yes or no?
They should.
Changes the loan to value.
Yeah.
I mean, yes-ish.
Yeah.
But from what we learned before, technically you could let the whole contract ride out, go through the settlement date. Once you're through the settlement date, it's void because you weren't able to deliver on this.
That's the answer right there. The buyer has no right to fill out a termination form if they just elected option 3 now and did not also include an appraisal contingency addendum. There is nothing in paragraph 8 that says the buyer can terminate based on this paragraph. However, if the buyer tried to get a mortgage and it didn't appraise and you guys couldn't work it out among the two parties and the settlement date came and went, the buyer's not in default because he had the mortgage protection. And at that point, settlement came and went, he wasn't in default, he or she wasn't in default because they tried, and therefore they would get their deposit back at that time. But they can't fill out a termination and release form in the middle of the agreement unless they attached an appraisal contingency addendum. And when I show you the appraisal contingency addendum, it says, if the house doesn't appraise and the buyer and seller can't come to terms, the buyer can terminate and they get their money back.
Can you actually scroll down the screen for the people in Zoom, wherever you're at?
Oh, okay. No, I don't,
Yeah, I had this one this year.
and a lot of.
And that's just for conventional financing.
Right, because with FHA and VA, they signed those amendatory clauses. Very good.
Yeah, I can do that. I'll sit up front with you.
Okay. So we were on page 3.
All right, there you go.
Yeah, so that's the buyer financing, and those were the only changes. And then page 4 is where we changed the mortgage commitment date. We moved the mortgage commitment date on page 4. But just so you understand, it's exactly what's your first name?
Josh.
Josh, it's exactly what Josh said. There is nothing in the agreement of sale that says the buyer can terminate. So if you elect financing and you're worried about the appraisal and you want to protect your buyer, then you have to add an appraisal contingency to the agreement of sale. So on page 14, you'd have to check that box that an appraisal contingency addendum is attached to the agreement of sale. Okay. What's next on this sample? The next form. We stay there. So for those of you on Zoom, line 165 in blue is where we move the mortgage contingency.
I'm learning, honey.
Okay.
Okay. And then go to the last page, page 14. if you will really want to protect the buyer, you're gonna check off the block that says, appraisal contingency is part of the agreement of sale. So if you elect the mortgage, and even if you waive it and they get a mortgage, an appraisal can still be part of the agreement at any time. If you have a cash buyer who's buying a $2 million house, what if the investor, the cash buyer says, I want to make sure I'm spending $2 million on something that's worth 2 million. So I've had cash offers contingent on an appraisal. So an appraisal doesn't have to coincide with a mortgage necessarily. Okay. Okay, now what's next after that? Appraisal contingency, perfect. So the appraisal contingency addendum now works a little bit better with the price escalation addendum. So if you recall the price escalation addendum, you know how you would say, my buyer will pay $1,000 over your highest and best offer up to 250. Let's say it's a $225,000 house. You make an offer at 225, but you'll pay 1,000 more up to a cap of 250. Then you also want to tell your seller, and by the way, as long as, and we'll take a $20,000 bridge between what it appraises for and the, so if we'll go up to 250 and we'll pay $20,000 of an appraisal gap. But the problem is you don't know what you're going to escalate to. So if we escalate to 240 and we'll do 20,000, then we're at 220. If we go to 250, now we're at 230. So what number do I write on the appraisal contingency addendum that is as a minimum appraisal value? You didn't know because you didn't know if you'd escalate or not. So with the new form, it clearly states in red on line 4, the agreement of sale is contingent upon the property being appraised in a manner that's acceptable to the underwriter if the buyer is obtaining financing at a value equal to or higher than the purchase price. This is where you can put in the gap, 20,000, 30,000, 10,000, 5,000, whatever your buyer agreed they would pay less than the purchase price, or you can write in an exact number. So you have a lot of options there. Then everything in blue was always there before. It's the contingency period. And then we added under 2 that the seller will provide access to the property to an appraiser who is selected. Then if the minimum appraised value is met in paragraph 3, or if the appraiser is not completed within the time period, the buyer accepts the property. So if the value is met, whatever value you put up in number 1, A, B, or C, if any of those are met, the buyer will move forward with buying the house at the purchase price, and they can provide additional funds at settlement to make up the difference. They can adjust the loan amount, they can adjust the loan to value, but they have to move forward if one of those minimum values is met. If the minimum value is not met, the buyer will deliver a copy of the appraisal to the seller. The buyer will, within the contingency, either terminate, enter into an agreement with the seller, or and if the buyer does not terminate in a mutually acceptable written agreement with the seller, the buyer will, within the contingency period, either terminate with written notice to the seller, and all deposit monies will go back to the buyer. Everything in blue is exactly what was in the contingency today. Or they'll enter into a mutually acceptable agreement and say, we'll split the difference, or we'll still buy it at the purchase price regardless of the appraised value, and they make the adjustments to the contract. And if the buyer does not terminate the agreement of sale or enter into a mutually written agreement with the seller within the contingency period, then the buyer waives this altogether. So if the buyer does nothing, they can't come back. If the contingency, it's just like the inspections. If the appraisal contingency period expired, this is null and void.
I'm sure there's a lot of questions on, because this is probably the most changed document.
Yeah,
So-
this is one that really works a lot better than the one that's out there today. Because it actually, you don't have to worry about what you're gonna escalate to. This is clearly where you're telling the seller, as long as the property appraises for $20,000 less than the purchase price, because what's the purchase price? Once you escalate, now you've changed the contract to represent a new purchase price, or if you execute the price escalation addendum, it says this is your new purchase price. I always tell people, as a practice, I use that price escalation to negotiate, but I never sign it. I go back to what we agreed to and I change the contract. So I change the purchase price on the contract. I change the mortgage amount on the contract. Because what if you leave the contract at 225 and you escalate it to 250? The bottom of that escalation clause says, by signing this, this is the new purchase price. But what happens when the buyer's agent doesn't send the contract with that new addendum to the bank and an appraiser goes out with the contract in his hand at 220 and never thinks to look at the addendum? Change the contract, strike off on the page 14, the price escalation addendum, don't execute it, use it as a listing agent, use it in your negotiations. But what do we know about negotiations? We negotiate back and forth, we pick up the phone, we call the other agent, we don't text, right? You call the other agent, you have dialogue. And I'm doing this intentionally. Talk to people. How about it, Linda?
Oh, goodness, yeah.
Yeah. I'm old, so
No, I
you're
am
old school too. So talk to people, come to terms, get it in writing, get everybody to initial and date, and forget about the price escalation. There is nothing wrong with using that to negotiate. It's a piece of information. Your buyer's showing their hand when they use that. Let's face it, it doesn't help the buyer that much. It may get them the house, but they're not gonna get a deal if they're showing their cards. A seller can come back and say, they'll give me 250, then I want 250. Well, we only said we'd give you 250 if we will do. So, and the buyer doesn't have to take it, so it's all negotiable. But once those are done, make sure your contract, your agreement of sale memorializes those negotiations. Because when the appraiser gets that contract, you want them to have the final number that was agreed upon. You see how that could happen if they don't get the price escalation addendum. Now you're creating a problem that may not have happened. Because what if the appraiser is an appraiser that just goes out and if it hits the purchase price, that's all I'm worried about to protect themselves.
So in this document, it also says on that second line, not to be used with FHA or VA financing.
Right, because those types of loans require, and I think Josh said this, these special addendums, they have those amendatory clauses that says the property must appraise. So you can't use this to override a government loan. Now, an FHA buyer, if the house doesn't appraise and the FHA buyer still wants to buy it, they can still buy it if they come up with the additional money. It doesn't mean they can't. You just don't use this form because this form would be in conflict with the government forms. And you can never have conflicting forms. So thanks for pointing that out. I always forget about that. It's just something I know that.
And I think we've all seen extra forms being added that don't
Yeah,
need to be added.
yes. That's a good point.
If you just wanted to appraise for full amount, you just put it in C, right?
For the purchase price.
Purchase price.
And if there's a specific amount left, like 20,000, 10,000, that would go in B. And if there's an exact number, it must appraise that, then you'd put it in C. I don't know when you'd ever use C, quite honestly, but we want to make it, everybody does things differently. So for the masses, we want it there.
So for those on Zoom, if you could take yourself off mute, if you have a question for Gary on this, because I'm sure there are questions. I mean, this is the biggest change document that we've seen so far today. Is there any questions on Zoom before we move down the list? Yeah, that would, well,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yourself, and I would.
I asked,
Okay.
Martha to put something, put the packet.
Oh. You just unmute and jump in.
Any questions? We're gonna move on to the next page. You guys good?
Well, I have a quick question, just on practice.
Sure.
We use price escalation to negotiate, which is logical to me. But from a buyer agent standpoint, which you still honor as a listing agent, and I'm the buyer agent, honor the terms of the price escalation by showing me
Yes.
a redacted offer.
Yes.
So that way I can at least be confident.
I'm not obligated to do that to
Right.
you, but as a courtesy, a professional courtesy, doing the right thing, building rapport with the other agent, I would send you the contract that caused you to escalate. Because I'm the one who's saying I don't want to use and execute your PPA. I'd rather change the agreement of sale. Yes, I would give you the courtesy as a fellow agent. I'm not obligated to, that's the other thing, even though
Unless you sign it.
unless I,
Yeah.
unless I sign it. But as a courtesy, I would definitely show you the other offer, absolutely.
So legally, we're okay to share that
Other offer?
offer to someone?
Well, I cross off,
I redact it.
I redact names.
Oh, I just want everybody to know that, because you can get yourself in.
Then
No, but there's nothing that says you can't. There, if you send it with names and everything, I don't know that that would necessarily be something you couldn't do. It's just, why would you do it?
Sorry, can you repeat what you just said?
He was asking me like, what offer caused his to escalate? So I would send him the offer, page 2 of an offer, and he could see that it was initialed at the bottom and probably DocuSign. I would just redact any names, but initials, he's not going to be able to figure out who the initials are. So I wouldn't send him the whole contract.
Okay.
I never had this happen to me before, except just recently. But, I was the buyer's agent and the listing agent told me she had 12 offers. And she told me if your buyer comes up 7,000, he'll get it.
She can do that.
Oh, she can do that?
Yeah, it says right in your offer are not confidential. Now, as a practice matter, when I'm competing and I send my offer over to Josh, I'm gonna say the terms of this offer shall not be shared and should remain confidential. Because unless a buyer and a seller have an agreement signed between the two of them that their offer is confidential, read your buyer's agency contract. I think it's paragraph. Well, the paragraph is called confidentiality. It might not be paragraph 8, but it's where it reminds your buyer that any offer they make is not confidential. And the seller could say, I got 250 from Josh, I got 260 from Belinda, what can you give me? A listing agent could hold, quote, auction. Now, we don't do that, and you'd be really pissed off at a listing agent if you found out they shopped your offer, but unless there's a signed agreement between the buyer and the seller that their offer will not be shopped or revealed and it's confidential, and who takes the time to get that thing signed? So at a minimum, when I'm the buyer's agent and I send my contract over to the listing agent, I type, this offer is to remain confidential, and I trust that they'll be ethical and keep it confidential. But if they don't, and they want to tell somebody else what they have, it is totally legal. We just don't do that as a matter of practice, because what does that do to your reputation as an agent?
Except
Who's
for
gonna wanna work with you?
if I'm doing that as a listing agent, am I not working for my seller?
You are working for your seller, absolutely, that's why you can do it. But
I actually just did this recently, just to give you some context. So like, I had multiple offers. I liked the terms of one of the other offers. It was a lot more clean. But technically, there was another offer that was higher. I didn't tell them exactly what the offer is, but I said, hey, this is the range that you're falling short. You know, let me know if there's anything that your buyer wants to do to try and close that. Otherwise, we're gonna have to make the best possible decision. I left it vague, just like that. And then they came up another however much they did. And we decided to go with that offer.
See, to me, that's just smart though, as a listing agent.
Right, but I don't
I do.
usually give, I don't think I ever would or have given an exact dollar amount. Because I want to use that as leverage for them to fill in the blank. If they think that the other offer is beating them and they're subconscious to think like, oh, well, they must be like at least 5,000 higher. And maybe it's only 500 higher. I'm not telling them that. And then they come back with a higher offer. All right, cool, everybody's happy. Nobody knows any different to be upset with it, and you move on.
that's a great example of how I've used that, you know, when the offer is not confidential. you do the multiple offer worksheet and the
Mhm.
seller's like, I like the terms of this one, but I like the price of this one. Then I go back and I'd say, to the price we like, look, we have a $20,000 deposit, you're giving us 2. Would you give us 20? Yeah, I'll give you 20.
Mhm.
Okay, and they waived radon. Would you consider waiving radon? Yeah, we'll waive radon, and then they get the higher price. So there's nothing wrong with sharing with another agent what they're competing with in terms to give your seller the best.
But it
Final,
goes back to your, you gotta pick up the phone and talk, you don't know.
right, right. That's with anything. Yeah, and that's totally, yep, that's
Well,
totally.
frustrated when I first came over here because I came here from Wisconsin and we actually had a form that did this. You didn't have to do it verbally. There was a form, multiple offer contingency. And so I could use that form for all 6 or 12 offers. And we could do that. So here it was frustrating to me because you couldn't do that. And how are you guys working for your sellers? Because I that was a great leverage tool.
Sure.
And then someone told me this, hey, you can talk about those as long as they don't tell you, you can sell it.
Agency agreement that the offer is not confidential. When people read that paragraph, they say, anything we learn about you during our time together is confidential and I gotta die with those secrets. Well, yeah, that's confidentiality. That's not what the paragraph says. It says your offer is not confidential.
Good to know.
Okay, any questions from anybody on Zoom on the appraisal contingency addendum?
Excuse me,
Sure.
can you say that again about the confidentiality?
Yeah, so if you read does anybody have a buyer's agency agreement or can you pull it up on your computer as we look in forms? There's a paragraph called confidentiality and it tells
In
the buyer.
Ethics report too, there are certain things that you can and cannot share according to the ethics
Right,
code.
well.
And another offer from another agent is one that you are not permitted to share according to the ethics code.
No, that's not true. You can share. There's nothing in the code of ethics that says you can't share another buyer's offer unless you have something in writing between that buyer and seller that their offer is to remain confidential and not be shared. That's in your buyer's agency agreement, the confidentiality paragraph. We practice that way. We practice that way because it's a good practice. But if
I have it up here.
if a listing agent shares an offer with another buyer's agent, so if you give me an offer and I share it with Josh, I've done nothing illegal or unethical to you. I wouldn't do it because it's not, I don't feel it's right personally, but it's not, there's nothing about it. So the confidentiality says, unless permitted by buyer or required by law, broker will not knowingly reveal any confidential information about the buyer. That's where, like, their ethnicity.
That includes the offer though, because that is the statement.
Let's go on.
About the buyer.
Let's go on. Buyers understand that sellers, so the buyer understands that the seller or the seller's representative, the listing agent, may not treat the existence, terms, or condition of any offer as confidential unless there's a confidentiality agreement between the buyer and the seller. This paragraph will survive termination or expiration of this buyer's agency contract. So there is nothing in the code of ethics or anywhere else that says I can't share your offer with another agent unless there's something in writing between the buyer and the seller. So if you don't want your offer shared, then you'd send something over and have the listing agent sign it, that he'll keep your offer confidential.
I have a hard time when an agent calls me and,
Thank you.
well, when I ask for a best and final offer. And an agent says to me, well, tell me what the highest offer is. You can't do that.
You could, you certainly can. You certainly can.
Yeah.
You
I
certainly
mean,
can.
technically, there are investors out there that make the argument all the time because it's your fiduciary responsibility to your seller. Your benefit would be to tell them the highest offer if they can provide better terms so that way they can beat the offer. Even if it's only by a few $100s, it's still a better offer to your client.
Sure. I mean, again, it's not that it's something that people practice all the time, but when you have aggressive investor buyers They will ask their agent to call and say, ask the listing agent what it's gonna take to get this, and there's nothing wrong if the listing agent tells them.
I think that's key too, personally, calling part.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm confident and convinced that I've beat out a lot of other people with lesser offers because I'm constantly blowing up their phone. To get them on the phone to make sure
Yeah.
that I can talk to them and get the last word. To make sure that I get an opportunity.
Or the listing agent can tell you things when you're on the phone with them that are important to the seller. We just won an offer by finding out that it had nothing to do with money. It was an extended settlement date that they wanted, and we won because the people they didn't have to sell their house to buy, they could stay there whenever, and they gave them, and because it was very important to them that they didn't have to rush out of the house. And that the kids, it had to do with kids and going to school and all that, and they didn't want to rush out. And they said, would you agree to, but we'd like to have the money sooner. Would you agree to a lease back? Absolutely, because we were cash, so we didn't have to worry about financing. Because remember, banks will make the buyer sign a letter at settlement that says they're gonna occupy the house within 60 days. So a buyer in a conventional loan, probably FHA and VA, and I'm not sure, I don't do a lot of those, but can't lease back for more than 60 days. Some banks say only 30. So you gotta watch when you're doing post settlement possession addendums, that you're not putting your buyer in conflict with their lender. So always call the lender and say, if my buyer doesn't occupy at settlement, how many months or how many days do they have to occupy as part of your loan package? What documents are you gonna have them sign? So it's just something to keep in mind. Okay, were you gonna say something else, Josh, or we?
No.
Questions from anyone on Zoom? So that was the appraisal contingency addendum. What's next on your list, Brian?
We have co-op.
Okay, so there was a change to the code. Remember before we were not allowed to negotiate commission as part of the offer. So now that code of ethics changed, and so this used to say at the top, there was a line that was stricken that said it could not be used as part of the agreement of sale. Well, now you can, we do it in our agreement of sale, we say the seller will pay so much towards concessions, or we talk about the buyer's agent compensation in the agreement of sale. So that was removed from the very top. And it just says that no law or association of realtors has set or recommended the broker fee or any amount of cooperating compensation. So that was really one of the biggest changes, which we all knew that no association is controlling what commissions and compensation will be. And the other thing we used to have in here, it said whoever was procuring costs. We removed that and said that the cooperating broker is identified as whoever's the broker for the buyer in the agreement of sale. So now we don't have a conflict. Agents were signing these and leaving them in the houses with what their commission was. Agents were sending these over before you wrote the offer to everybody that was going to write an offer. Well, now you have all these signed co-op broker compensations out there, and you're not going to pay 10 companies, right? You're going to pay the person who sold your house. So I would never sign these ahead of time. I would just say, send it over with the offer, I'm going to pay you. I'm not going to stiff you. But if your offer is accepted, then I'll sign this, because I'm only signing one for whoever gets the offer, whoever wins. I'm not signing this ahead of time. Now you could sign them ahead of time because you're only paying the broker who's identified in the agreement of sale. So you have a signed, executed agreement of sale. At the top of that agreement of sale, it says broker for the buyer, and that's who you're paying. Okay, so two things. We removed up here that it couldn't be used as to negotiate at the time of a offer, and we're paying the broker who's listed in the agreement of sale. And then we just wanted to make sure that all brokers, any dispute between brokers regarding the entitlement to a compensation, to cooperating compensation, will have to go through arbitration. So there was something in there about arbitration before. We just added the red words regarding entitlement to cooperating compensation.
I have a quick question then.
Sure.
Why don't we just put it right on the contract instead of dealing with this form?
Well, there was a lot of there was a lot of conversation about putting it in the form. The one thing you have to remember about cooperating compensation is, and this is a little bit of a sidebar, and I just read an article this week. I wish I would have brought it and printed it. There are many states that don't do cooperating compensation. Cooperating compensation is what got us in trouble. When you were going into a listing with your seller and you said on your contract, your fee to sell your house is 10 donuts, and I'm going to give 5 donuts away to the buyer's agent, that was deemed as price fixing. We were price fixing, and we lost the argument. Whether we agree or disagree, it doesn't matter. The federal DOJ, we ended up paying $400 million. And we've not changed. We've not changed our practices. We still go in. Now, we're supposed to tell our seller, you have the right to go in and tell a seller, I'm listing your house and this is my fee. As far as payment to another agent, you don't have to pay them anything. Our buyer's agency agreement for the last 1,800 years has said, you're hiring me and you're paying me. Unless the seller is willing to kick in some money, and then that will be used towards my fee. But your buyer's agency agreement has always said the buyer's responsible for paying you, period. But we always got cooperating compensation, so we said to the buyer, you don't have to pay me, I'm free, blah, blah. We did all kinds of things to get business, which wasn't true. The buyer always is responsible to pay you. So if your seller doesn't want to cooperate, then they can put it in the agreement of sale. Just put in here what you want. And then it's negotiable. That's what the DOJ wants. It's to be negotiable between a buyer and a seller, not predetermined ahead of time. That's where they viewed it was price fixing. So there are states that do not allow cooperating compensation at all. It all has to be negotiated between the buyer and the seller. Delaware, you don't have any cooperating compensation.
Is there talks about getting rid of this?
Yes. Yes. The reason we didn't do it is because too many brokers practices use this, and we didn't want to strip the form away. But it's really not, in everything I read nationally, it's like we're going down the article I read was we've learned nothing. We're going down the same rabbit hole. We were not allowed to advertise our co-op compensation in MLS, and that was an easy fix. They just took the field down, right? That was no big deal. But what did agents do? Got riders. Started putting riders on their signs. Getting magnets made or pillows made or stuff made in the house that had a number and a % sign behind it to advertise when the buyer's agent went to the house. So we're still doing what they don't want us to do. And they're still watching us. So we're keeping an eye on this. I will tell you, in the committee, it was probably a 60-40 split to keep it or not keep it. Several of the companies that are represented in the committee don't use it anymore. So I think it's something to watch.
So short answer is put it where? As of
It's
today.
up to you and how you, like, it's still in the listing contract that the seller can you do cooperating compensation. And before you show a house, you can still call an agent and ask them. Or the listing agent will tell you, just put it in the contract. So it's really, it should be negotiable.
And Ryan, if it's in the contract, that counts as compliance.
Correct. So, I mean, my question, well, you kind of answered it, is kind of what you want to see, like what's best practice, because still to this day, I'll get agents, well, they'll send me this and also put in agreement of sale. If you're not savvy, you don't read it, now you're paying
Well,
double,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah. The agent, are still putting it in here. When you read the agreement of sale, it says that if what they offered you isn't enough and you want more, then you can put the extra that you want in the contract or all
Well,
concessions.
so what happens? Right, so some people bypass this and
Yeah.
just put it right in there because they know we're gonna give 2.5% or whatever. and it says in addition to, would you still get this signed with a zero from just protection or just completely?
Well, just make sure that the combination between this form and the agreement of sale is the
It's the total.
it's either one or the other, not both. It's only both when this isn't enough and you want more.
Correct.
Then the balance that you want would go in the agreement of sale.
So I had a situation where it was like competing offers.
Mhm.
So I would just put it in the agreement of sale to make it easier, one less form. No, what?
No, I mean, you have a co-op broker form, or you just put
Well, you
everything.
just said if it's in the
Well-
agreement of sale, then you're compliant.
But where did you put it in the agreement of sale? Under concessions or as additional compensation?
That's my question. So where it says additional compensation, if there is no co-broker signed. And that's the amount agreed upon, then you're good, correct?
The contract said in addition to any
Right.
co-op
So if
compensation,
it's none, then it's not an addition.
then you should ask for a seller concession, right? Then there's no addition, right? So in addition to any cooperating compensation negotiated between the buyers using the CBC form or some other agreement, if any, seller will pay the following fee to the broker for the buyer on behalf of the buyer at settlement.
Okay, so
So-
if you're not adding the two together, then only use that?
Yes, could, but it was designed to be in addition. This is what you should have used.
Okay, so start with that. Is what you're saying.
Yes,
Okay,
if this isn't enough, in addition to this, I want an extra 1%.
because the other agent was trained, I guess, like that, and I was talking to Dave, I'm like, Dave, I don't understand, if it doesn't exist, then it's the same, but I wasn't gonna argue over just crossing it out.
Well, I'm
with the
just telling
form.
you how-
I was like, I want to
Like-
understand.
This is all gonna change.
So
When this goes away, this will
the
change.
concession would then be seller credit. And then the buyer is paying you your fee.
Another thing you should be doing is on your buyer's cost sheet, every one of your buyer's cost sheets should show my commission. You can put a credit there or redo it after the agreement's signed to show that you've negotiated some of that from the seller. But it is a buyer's cost. On the buyer's estimated cost sheet, your fee is a buyer's cost. You either got closing cost assistance from the seller that you're gonna show a negative number, or you're gonna say, I got cooperating compensation from the seller, which is negative to offset this, but they have to be informed that your commission, your fee is on their cost sheet. It can be followed by a negative number. Whatever, and you can redo it. So if you start off giving them one when they sign the agreement that says we've asked for 3%. Or we asked for 10% and now we got 7, then you gotta go back and redo it at that time. So they know up front they need to bring an extra $3,000 or 4,000 to compensate you. Is everybody following me on that? Cause I don't think we're changing our buyer's cost sheets.
Right.
We're not letting them know that our fee is an expense to them to buy the house. Because what if the seller refuses to give you anything? No closing cost assistance and no cooperating compensation. Who's paying you?
You're setting the expectation, how are you gonna pay it?
And if
Best
you
case
have,
scenario or most case scenarios, that fee is covered in by the seller, but you have to at least let them.
For verbal, I haven't actually thought sheet, but I understand what you're saying. You don't do it either. Like,
I don't,
who's been putting their commission in their buyer's estimated cost sheet? One,
I-
out of a whole,
I use-
so, no, you're doing.
I think you had that conversation with them up front when you're going over the buyer's agency agreement, that, you know, I'm working for you, this is what I'm paid. Now, you can come back and say, let's say they tell you, you know, the seller wouldn't pay anything based on the purchase price. Let's say it's a $250,000 house, and you had 4% as your fee, that's $10,000, and they say, look, I can only pay you $7,000. You can go back and modify your buyer's agency agreement to say, my fee will be 7,000, you both initial and date it, and that's what they brought to settlement. So you should be revising those agreements as well so that you don't have a vehicle to go back and charge them later after settlement. Now, no one would ever do that. I don't.
But we're not doing a buyer's cost sheet until we have a property too, so.
Well,
Well, sometimes in an initial buyer's agency meeting, they want an idea of what they have.
Probably, but, oh, you mean like, I see what you're
As
saying.
an example, to show them, you're gonna have an appraisal fee, you're gonna have title insurance, you're gonna have insurance, you're gonna be paying the seller back for prorated taxes. So buyers don't have a clue. They think they have $20,000, so they can put that all down as a down payment. Well, no, probably 10 of the 20 is going towards your closing.
well, I think like, for me, I think the frustration comes in with all the different forms is there should be a flow chart that is published and put out for everybody to understand. Because I think the confusion comes in with the co-broke. The co-broke is part of the listing contract. If I say that I'm giving another broker whatever number in there, right? I have to stay by that, or I have to write an addendum to that contract. So if I'm communicating that with somebody, that's only because, let's say Ryan is the broker. I give Ryan all of the money, then Ryan distributes the money from there. Okay? People don't understand that because they are used to getting a check at settlement. So they think, oh, well, they're just paying me directly. No. Ryan is paying both parties. Then the seller, if you write it in, the seller, John Smith, is paying you and paying their person. There is no broker involved at that point as far as how the money is distributed. If you're doing in the concession, the seller, John Smith, is now paying Jane Doe, your buyer, and their agent. You're not part of that at all.
Yeah.
Your buyer then is paying, and I don't think everybody understands that.
Because the settlement sheet's still gonna show it on the seller's side as an expense.
Right.
But, and you don't have cooperating compensation, you don't sign this for an in-house deal. You only have cooperation with two different brokers, period. Ryan's responsible, well, Will, I guess, whoever your broker is responsible that when all that money comes in to Keystone, which two agents get the money? So when you're doing an in-house deal and you're selling each other's properties, you don't use a co-op broker for it. You still want to know what you're being paid, but that's up to your broker to decide when that money comes in, who to give it to. So, and when I say this, I'm not being critical. But to your point, and you explained it perfectly, why do you know that? Because you've studied it, you've read it, and you understood it. That is everybody's responsibility. We're not sitting on this forms committee to make an idiot.
We're gonna learn it 2 ways.
I refuse to dumb this stuff down.
You're gonna learn it this way, by educating yourself,
Yeah,
and there's only 32, which drives me nuts, out of our 220 agents. Or you're gonna learn it the hard way, and you're gonna pay. You're either gonna pay some penalties, or you're gonna pay because you didn't read the form and get it, and someone else is gonna get your money. That's how it's gonna work.
you make a lot of money doing this, and our standard of entry is if you have a GED and you pass the test, you're in, with no experience. You get that state license, and the state's theory is your broker's gonna train you. An appraiser gets a license and they can't do an independent appraisal for 2 years until they get so many appraisals done under their belt, under a seasoned appraiser. So if I were to change the law, you'd get a license and you'd have to work under an associate broker or a broker for 2 years, deals with, you can't sign a deal on your own for 2 years. And then
Why are you looking at me?
you're on your own. You can't be saying, there should be a photo, you know? No, you're right. I'm not. But no, you think about a flow chart. We can barely keep up with all the forms we have to do to make them as clear as possible. You're responsible to know every word on this thing. I remember an agent, you may have known him, and may he rest in peace. He passed away, Steve Thompson, Prudential Thompson Wood up in Camp Hill. Steve would know, Steve knew every word on this contract. He could tell you the paragraph, he could tell you the subparagraph. He knew it, he read it, we all should know that. We all should know that. You can't just fill in the blanks, show up at settlement and get a big check. You are responsible to know this stuff. I sit on the professional standards hearing panel, and we just had a hearing where a consumer brought an ethics case against an agent for not explaining the form to them. And he knew, and they're the consuming public, they don't know. And we are responsible to educate them, and we're responsible to know what we're doing. So yeah, a flow chart would be great. And there's checklists for things, but it's all we can do to keep the forms updated. Now we're looking at a task force to look at again, once again, the 11-page seller's property disclosure statement. I'm like, please don't pick me for that committee. And I encourage you to go to those meetings we have and sit in the standard forms forum and hear what other people are going through and stuff, and join the committee. You know, we'd love to have more people. Go ahead.
When I was president of our association, and the stuff that we saw coming out of our professional standards committee was shocking, and that's an understatement. What I'd like to further say is this: can you, Kenny, and also Kenny O'Worley, I think is on forms committee. Can someone get together and push this kind of an issue? Almost insist that an agent coming on board should have 2 years of
No,
experience.
that's all for the real
Can we
estate committee.
do that?
Well, there is a committee about it, and the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors has sent some recommendations to the state, but the state
It's a
licensing
commission
committee.
thing.
Yeah, it's a commission thing, so the commission thing. And the commission believes that when we train them on theory and license, give them a license, and now it's up to the broker to mentor them. But what do brokers, I'm not saying your company, but a lot of brokers just say, go sit with Josh. Now, like, I always compare it to playing golf. When I wanted to learn golf, I went right to a golf pro and took golf lessons. Because if I went with my brother, he's gonna teach me his bad habits. If I went with my buddy, he's gonna teach me his bad habits. So I'm not saying Josh would have bad habits, but what if there's something Josh doesn't know, and you said, well, this is what Josh taught me. So the broker is responsible for all your activities. He's to supervise you. He's to put you through training. The good thing about Keller Williams, we do a great training. So you can always learn a lot through Keller Williams. So no, nobody's doing anything wrong. And by the grace of God, we get to closing. And because everybody was happy, nobody knows what they don't know. And nobody knows what was missed, right? So you might have made a mistake, but you got to closing, everybody's happy, you did your best. And so many closings happened, but if you'd look at the transaction, you'd see a lot of things that went wrong, but nobody knew because you don't know what you don't know.
But I can tell you from the leadership level here, I've never seen so many buyers or sellers coming after their agents than I have in the last 18 months.
Yes.
Really?
It's almost 1 to 2 a month. We're getting a notice
Are you kidding?
and it has to.
I know
go
people
through-
are ugly right now.
It's bad. It's
Yeah.
really, really bad. So
We have to be on our game. And everything I teach is always from a risk management standpoint. My buyer's never coming back to me, or my seller's never coming back to me. I do a receipt of documents with every transaction. I
you
make
mean
the buyer,
negatively.
huh?
You mean negatively?
Yeah.
They're coming back to
They're
work.
not coming back, they're coming back to work with me. They're not.
Okay.
Not coming back to sue me, yeah. They're not suing me for something that I missed. They can't say I didn't know. So like when I when I sit down with a buyer to sign a contract, I don't do a DocuSign unless they're really away, and if they're gonna be away, then we have an hour phone conversation. I show them the deed. I show them in the deed, look, from the deed, I pull the plot plan. Because what's a plot plan gonna show me? What if they're buying this screen and it's 10 acres? And they wanna build this huge house, and back here they wanna put a pool, and they wanna put in like an outdoor fire pit and an outdoor kitchen. And right through here is a public sewer line, and right through here is a public water line, and those are easements, and this is all they have in 10 acres. So you didn't give them that plot plan. Now you're in court. Seller didn't disclose any easement, they're gonna sue the seller. The judge says, what's your first name? I'm not gonna use your.
That's okay.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm just being a bit, yeah.
that's good. You didn't.
Dana.
Dana.
Yeah.
Dana, isn't it true that the deed would show you where the plot plan is in public records? That's correct, Ernie. And Dana, isn't it true that you could have pulled up public records in York County and found that? Yes, Your Honor. And isn't it true that you could have asked the title company to pull the deed and see if there were any easements prior to going to closing? Yes, it is. So you didn't do your job, so that you have no defense. So I pull the deed, I pull the plot plan, I look at the deed. If it says there were restrictions, even if they're 40 years old, I print those restrictions. And I get the buyer to sign a receipt of documents. Buyer acknowledges receipt of the MLS sheet, the MLS tax record, the county tax record, the deed, the tax records. If I have tax receipts, I give them the tax receipts. I give them a plot plan, and they sign that, and the documents are behind it, and they have copies.
I feel like I suck.
So they
right now.
can't say they don't know. They can't say they don't know. The first thing you do when you're selling a house or listing a house is you pull that deed. If you're doing anything, listing agent or selling agent, pull that deed. Why? Who owns the property? So, oh my gosh, Ryan calls me to say, I want to sell my house. I pull the deed and it says Dana. Well, who the hell are you? Well, I have her power of attorney. Okay, let me see that. You have her power of attorney to write checks. In that power of attorney, there's a list. You're gonna get, if anybody tells you they're the power of attorney for their mother, their father, their brother, their sister who's in a nursing home and has dementia or whatever their problem is, and why that person who's on the deed can't sign the contract, you review that power of attorney because it's a list of powers that they have. And if one of those powers doesn't say to sell real estate, that power of attorney is useless to sell that person's house. Now, you don't realize that. You get to settlement and you don't close. Now you're really up for a lawsuit. So we have to know what we're doing and pay attention to things. What else is on the deed? Easements. What else is on a deed? First right of refusal. So now you're at settlement. And the settlement person says to you, Dana, did Ryan sign off on his first right of refusal to buy this 500-acre farm that you're selling? No, let me go make a phone call. Ryan, I'm selling Bill's farm, and it just so happened to say in the deed that Bill gave you the first right of refusal. I'm sure you have no interest in buying a 500-acre farm that could be subdivided into 10 developments. You're damn right. I want that first right of
Well, you
refusal.
just sold it to him by then.
Yeah. So now your deal fell apart because you didn't get him to.
Doesn't title usually or
Well, you can rely on your
Negating
title
what you're
company,
saying,
but at
but-
the same time, you have to
Yeah.
to do it yourself too. So how did I learn all this? By doing it wrong and then being in these situations where you get to settlement and you have a mess.
Most expensive way to look.
Yeah, I mean, luckily, I've never had to pay in any law, I was sued once by a guy and it was a frivolous lawsuit. And he was suing everybody for the amount of our deductible, thinking we would just settle. But I knew I didn't do anything wrong, but I had notes on my files of everything I did. And it cost me $7,000 to fight him, $5,000 if I would have just given in, but I didn't want to say, I didn't want a lawsuit. It was worth it to me to keep my reputation, and he lost. And he knew it, he knew he was a scammer, but it was 19 months of hell. Dealing with attorneys and depositions and all that. The other thing, take notes on your files. Every day, I write what I did on every file in a spreadsheet.
I
Call
feel like
Dana.
brand new.
Call Dana, talk about this, she asked me about how many horses she can put on here. I told her to call the zoning officer. I followed up in 2 days. Did you call the zoning officer? She said, yes, I can do 2 horses per acre and I have to have an extra acre on top of that just because. So the biggest thing on knowing what you should and shouldn't do is ask your buyer what's the most important thing they want to do with this property. And then you know what rabbit holes to go down, So don't be scared, just think through everything and don't rush and don't just fill in the blanks. You really, Ryan's right, lawsuits are rampant and sellers are coming after agents on ethics violations. We see more of that at the association level. And I just shake my head, like, if they only would have done this, we would not be here.
Are sellers like feeling shorted or?
Well, I think we live in a society where nobody wants to take responsibility for their behavior in general.
Mhm.
That's become more prevalent. And people say one thing and they do another, and that's why documentation helps you.
Sellers are getting nailed more on disclosure stuff.
Yes,
And buyers are the ones that are really driving everything.
Mhm.
But if the seller's at fault, it's more so in the disclosure stuff.
Okay.
right. It's non-disclosure and misrepresentation. So to that point,
Yeah, because the second they buy a house, something goes wrong and they feel the seller knew,
And
but
that
they're trying to
happens.
prove it
That's
is,
home ownership.
Yeah.
It just happened. But they want it.
that hasn't happened.
yeah. It's really important for both the buyer's agent and the seller's agent to review the property disclosure. So you can't just give your buyer the disclosure and say, sign this. If there's blanks on there, it's your obligation as the buyer's agent to go back to the listing agent and say, please fill this form out, and we will not sign it until it's complete. So you have a responsibility as the buyer's agent to review it, and the listing agent shouldn't even have that on bright if it's not complete. So that's the crust of, I'd say 90% of lawsuits.
So you're competing against 7 other people.
Yeah, exactly right. And then you're the pain in the ass to the listing agent
Yep.
because your buyer, all other 6 is signed the disclosure. You're the one who wants Belinda to fill it out, so she throws your offer aside and you don't get the house. But you also don't get the lawsuit that came by the one that bought it because her disclosure wasn't filled out either. So
I
But
hear
what
you.
do you really, what
do
do
the
you
right
do though, when you have a seller that says, I'm not filling that out, I make them sign it that they won't fill it out, but you're setting yourself up.
yeah, you don't have to take every listing. That's not discrimination.
I actually we had that exact scenario.
Really?
And I had him reach out to Will just so he could give them, but yeah, they wouldn't sign it. They refused to.
Yeah, that's a violation of state law. The state requires a disclosure even if you sign privately. That's a state law.
But they're only to fill out what they know, and if what they don't, like, how are we to, unless we know that they
I
aren't
mean, that's got
disclosing something?
Didn't work with me.
Husband died, and like, I don't know what kind of septic system we have, you know? And that's what I'm saying, but then they sign it like that, and then everyone's like, oh, there's no way they didn't know.
Where? Yes or no? Or are there any? Perfect example is under septic. There's a question about tanks. So your seller is living in a 2024 house in a development. And it says, and you know they have public sewer and public water. And it says, are there any concrete tanks? Are there any fiberglass tanks? Are there any? So they say, no, 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 no. And I look at them when I review the form and I say, when did you dig up your backyard? I never dug up my backyard. Well, you're saying you have no tanks buried in your yard. Well, why would I? Well, how do you know this isn't where the original farmhouse of the development was? The buyer wants to put a pool in the backyard. They start digging and they hit the cisterns. You had the option to say unknown. Are there any? Yes, no, unknown. If you don't know, then you put unknown. Now the buyer's on notice. I want to put a pool in. He doesn't know if there's tanks. As part of one of my inspections, I'm going to come in and do some probes in the backyard. So I know if I can put the pool in or not. Because if the seller said no, and this is an exaggeration for purposes of
And
example.
I'm freaking all over again.
This is an exaggeration for purposes of an example. So the seller said no, the buyer goes to dig the pool, excavation costs were estimated at 5,000. Now they have to remove concrete tanks and stuff because of an abandoned septic system. And now it's 10,000. You can bet the buyer is going to sue the seller for the increased excavation costs when they could have said no.
Or unknown.
Unknown.
Unknown. I'm sorry, they could have said unknown.
So that would be a case they could.
So you have to
Said no and not unknown.
sit down with the seller. We spend 2 hours on the disclosure pre-listing.
You
We
can
go
work
over
with-
every question and I don't fill it out for them. I guide them on asking questions. So when they say no to tank, I say, do you really know that there are no tanks in your backyard? Or they tell me a story. I'll say like, did you ever have dampness in the basement? Was there ever a time water came in the basement? Because the biggest thing is damp, wet basements, because buyers want to finish the basement. I remind them, did you ever file an insurance claim? Because they forget. They live in a homeowners association in 22(1)(a) says, are there any deed restrictions? No. They think, is there anything in my deed that restricts what I can do? Covenants and restrictions are deed restrictions. So I make them say yes. And then on the last page, the covenants and restrictions, declaration of covenants and restrictions as found in, as per the deed or found in this book and page in the county. So we never touch the form and fill it out. But you can help them understand what the question's asking. And I tell them this 2 hours is to cover your ass from a lawsuit the best we can. Because if the buyer's gonna come back at you, it's gonna be on that disclosure form. So I give it to them weeks in advance, when I know I'm gonna list their house, and I say,
Yeah.
start filling this out. And then we'll go over it together. I'll look at your answers and we'll go over it together. And you may have to, you know, I give them a clean copy. I said, this is just a draft. And if you don't understand a question, put a circle by it to ask me when we get together. And it's just start, because if they lived in the house for 30 years, they forget what they've
Right.
done. So it helps a little bit. To give it to them in advance, for sure.
Because I see this also, the problem with professional standards, and that's this. I'm about to sign a listing on Saturday. There is an executor of the estate. The executor of the estate, though he has never lived in that home, is signing off on the seller disclosure. However, he has spent the last year and a half having the home cleaned up, set to go, so on and so forth. So he knows about the home. What does the executor of the estate have to do about that besides just sign off on the bottom
The
saying
law
that?
says that the law requires that they don't have to fill out a disclosure, however, they must disclose any known material defects. I tell the executor, unless you're in California and you were estranged from your mother and you don't even know what the house looks like, you can sign the bottom. But if you've been paying the water bill, you know you have public water. If you've been paying the oil bill, you know you have an oil furnace. If you've been paying a sewer bill, you know you have public sewage. So there are some basics. Now, I have an estate right now, and it's 2 attorneys who are the executrixes. I have 2. They filled out 4 answers. There was a date on the water heater. We put that in the disclosure. They know there's a well because we can see the well, and they're not paying a bill for a water company. They're not paying a sewage bill, and we know where the sewage tanks are. So we know we have private on-lot sewage, we know we have a well, and we knew the date of the water heater. And there was one other thing they found when they were going through the deceased records that we put on the disclosure. Those are the only 4 questions that are answered, and they signed every page and the block up front. That's totally fine.
Did they check unknown everywhere or you just?
No,
fill in what
just
you
left
got?
it blank. We filled out what we knew, and I asked them what they want to do. I fought with the state attorneys many times who wanted my executor or executrix to just sign the bottom. Attorneys want that.
Yeah, I've heard of-
Attorneys want that. Like I said, but the son has lived in that house with his mother for the last 10 years. He knows the roof leaks. He knows they get water in the basement every time it rains. I'm not taking the listing unless you disclose this. So I just won't take the listing. But attorneys want to use they forget that the law says, the disclosure law says, they're exempt from filling it out. However, they must disclose known defects. So they want to forget about that last.
Right.
Some attorneys.
Plausible than that.
I've heard
Yeah.
of people losing it, fighting the attorney, because when you're dealing with the agent versus attorney, people tend to go to the attorney.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
So,
frustrating.
yeah, at best.
I mean, I'm dealing with this currently, a client. Now, I think it materialized a little bit more because they waived the mortgage contingency, the appraisal came in less, they didn't really want to have to pay out of pocket, but then they had to pay more out of pocket, so then they felt like they overpaid for the house. Then they're looking back at all the different ways they could go back at the seller. One of the biggest things was they did not check if there were any animals in the house. They said there was never any animals in the house. Well, the neighbor, you probably want to play nice with your neighbors, because the neighbor was able to then produce photographic evidence of animals being in the house. Said client, highly allergic to the animals that were in the house. And now had to incur quite a few expenses from medical and otherwise to get the property back to where it needed to be for them to even live in the house in the first place. And it is going through
What side are you on?
I'm on the buyer side.
Thank God.
Yeah, one of. Stories there, but that's one of the few that are popping up
Yeah.
from. Just, and he, I mean, he obviously covers his bases very well, so we know it's like, someone's gonna be at fault, luckily it won't be.
The seller lies to us, like, what the hell are we supposed to do?
Won't be brought against him.
Right.
But it's
Yeah.
being, you gotta remember, attorneys wanna do what's called a broad sweep. So they're gonna bring everybody in the transaction, the buyer's agent, the seller's agent, the seller, the buyer, the brokers, both brokers. They're gonna bring everybody in they can to hopefully tag a piece of liability to somebody. And then you're brought in and you have to defend yourself to say, I had no wrongdoing. But it's a pain to go through that. And he brings up a good point about estates. If you've never done an estate, talk to an agent who has done an estate. It's a whole different process of listing. Now you have to have proof of who the executors are, short certificate. You have to find out who the estate attorney is, were inheritance taxes paid yet? Because if they're not, you gotta have that on the seller's cost sheet. At closing, they're not getting all the proceeds because the unpayment of inheritance taxes is a lien against the house. So if the attorney can't prove with a document from the state called letter of appraisement, has nothing to do with appraisal, where the Department of Revenue says Dana's estate has satisfied Pennsylvania's estate taxes in full.
See, I've done estates and title handle this.
He's sitting right.
Yeah, but you gotta say, like, if you have.
But I do know about like the inheritance, and then my house that I bought actually had the first mortgage on it. Hell.
If your executor thought you did the cost sheet showing they were getting 300,000 and now they're only getting 150 because they held 150. And you could have told them, now, by the way, you're only gonna get 300,000 if all your inheritance taxes is paid. If not, and I don't know the amount yet, but the title company will calculate that. So, you know, it's not that you were wrong and they can't sue you for that extra money because it had to be done for title, but it certainly gives them a bad taste in their mouth that you didn't know.
Right,
You set them up for an expectation to get 300 and they only got 150.
right, absolutely.
So there's a lot of things that are different about an estate. So just work with somebody who did it and learn for yourself. It's a great experience. And then you make relationships with attorneys and you get a lot of leads on estates and it's great.
For the sake of everyone's time,
Yeah,
we
we
are
gotta
a little
get-
over, we're a little over, I'm gonna just say, Gary, thank you. Now, contract classes can always go down slippery slope.
Yeah.
This wasn't meant to scare anybody. negative. We need to learn this. How can you be better and what do I need to learn? Read these things, educate yourself. If you have questions, you have a team of people that can help you. We'll continue to teach the contract class over and over. Appreciate you guys coming. And then if you guys have any questions after the class, you can be sure Gary.
Yeah, I'll stick around. The only thing I wanted to tell you was on the listing contract, there was just a section in marketing that complies with the new, what you're allowed to do in the MLS and what you're not allowed to do in the MLS, and it's all in red and it's pretty straightforward. This is when you're gonna delay showings or delayed marketing, how you have to do that, and you really have to follow Bright's procedures. I don't know how many of you take a listing and then they say we want to delay showings, or we only want to do it in-house or stuff like that. So there's Bright policies for that, but it's all in red on the listing contract. That's the only one we didn't get to go over. And it's really straightforward. That's why we
And
put that
these
one last.
documents are now published and uploaded?
No, not till September 1st.
September 1st, all right, so write that down, and that'll automatically go into your dot loops and your documents.
So it will be updated right
Yeah,
now.
yeah, because they actually handle all that.
Yeah, so PAR will send these to the vendor for publication by 9/1. And again, no, you never want to scare anybody.
Well, no, it's a good thing.
Just,
We're not.
you know, a friend of mine's mother always told me years ago, listen to your belly button. If there's something weird about a transaction and you're just not feeling right, then listen to that instinct and figure out whether your buyer's giving you a wrong signal, your seller's giving you a signal, talk to somebody, get to the root of the problem. Don't go to closing and then have a lawsuit after that. Get it done before settlement. Even if you lose the deal, it's cheaper than having a lawsuit. Because even though Josh isn't gonna be liable for anything on that transaction, it's a ton of his time talking to attorneys, and he's not getting paid for any of that time.
And you also gotta be careful that you don't talk to the attorneys until you talk to our attorneys.
Oh, did you make
Yeah,
that
or
mistake,
you're-
or-
No, I didn't make that mistake, but.
Errors and omissions may not
luckily,
pay, yeah.
I had enough conversations and Rachel was kind enough to advise me to consult with our attorneys before I say anything, because at that point I could be just like. Our buyers talking directly to a seller and then something gets misconstrued and now all of a sudden I got an issue.
Yeah,
So, yeah, I'm not trying to have no issues.
it sounds like you're doing great. But there's